Somewhere right now, someone is buying a grandmother's jewelry box at a garage sale for 20 bucks, and they already know it's worth 100 times that. Not because they're experts, because they bothered to look closely and the family selling it didn't. To them, an old ring is just an old ring, worn, dated, easy to let go of. For the person handing over the cash, it's a stone that hasn't been made in over a century, sitting inside a setting nobody alive can recreate. That gap in knowledge is where fortunes quietly disappear, one garage sale at a time. Today, we're closing that gap. These are the 10 vintage gemstones that will be worth a fortune in 2026, and if even one of them is sitting in a drawer somewhere in your house, you need to know it before anyone else does. Number 10. Georgian foiled garnets. Before 1900, before electric light existed in most homes, jewelers backed flat-cut garnets with thin sheets of metal foil to throw candlelight back through the stone and make it glow. It's a technique nobody uses today because nobody needs to anymore. That means every genuine Georgian foiled garnet piece, the closed-back settings, the rose-cut faceting done entirely by hand, is a physical record of a technique that simply does not exist in modern jewelry making. These pieces are routinely mistaken for costume jewelry because garnet itself is common. What is not common is a 200-year-old hand-faceted stone in its original foiled setting, untouched, unresized, unmodernized. Collectors specializing in Georgian jewelry are paying 2 to 4 times more for pieces with intact original foil backs than for identical stones reset in later mountings. Most owners see a red stone and assume garnet, and stop thinking about it right there. That assumption is exactly what lets these pieces slip out of families for almost nothing. If you own a dark red antique piece with a closed metal back and you've never had it examined by a period jewelry specialist, you may be looking at a small foiled window into a century that left almost nothing else behind. Number 9. Untreated Persian turquoise. Modern turquoise is stabilized, dyed, resin-treated, and mined from sources that produce color inconsistently. Persian turquoise from the historic Nishapur mines in Iran is different. It's a pure, uniform robin's egg blue with almost no matrix, no treatment, and no modern equivalent. Those deposits are largely exhausted, and what's left is tightly controlled. Victorian and Edwardian pieces set with natural, untreated Persian turquoise are becoming harder to source every single year because the material itself has stopped being made. Fine, untreated Persian turquoise is now trading at levels that would have seemed absurd for the stone a decade ago, with saturated, matrix-free examples commanding prices closer to fine sapphire than to the turquoise sold in shopping mall cases. The irony is that turquoise has always been treated as an affordable stone, which is exactly why so much of the finest surviving material has slipped through estate sales and pawn counters completely unrecognized for what it actually is. If your turquoise piece has that soft, waxy, almost sky blue color with no green undertone and no visible veining, get it tested before you assume it's just an old souvenir. Number 8. Art Deco Burmese sapphire jewelry. The 1920s and 1930s produced some of the boldest geometric jewelry ever made, and the sapphires set into those platinum and diamond pieces came almost exclusively from Burma's Mogok Valley, long before heat treatment became the industry standard. An Art Deco piece holding an untreated Burmese sapphire is carrying 2 separate rarities at once, the vintage craftsmanship and the untreated origin, and both of those categories are shrinking independently of each other. Certified natural, no-heat Burmese sapphires from this exact era are now being pulled out of estate collections and recertified, and the results are changing what families thought they owned. Dealers who specialize in this period will tell you the geometry of the setting is often the first clue. That specific stepped, symmetrical Art Deco line tends to appear on stones the jeweler already knew were exceptional, because nobody wasted that level of platinum work on a mediocre center stone. If you have an Art Deco sapphire piece that has been in the family for generations and has never been formally graded, that lab report is not a formality. It's the difference between an heirloom and a fortune. Number 7. Edwardian natural pearls. Cultured pearls didn't exist commercially until the early 20th century, which means every pearl set into genuine Edwardian jewelry came from a wild oyster, fished by hand, with odds so low that natural pearl strands were once valued above diamonds of equal size. The natural pearl beds that supplied that era, particularly in the Persian Gulf, were fished into near collapse decades ago and never recovered. A strand of matched natural pearls from this period is not just old, it's a survivor of an entire ecosystem that no longer produces at scale. Auction houses have watched natural pearl prices climb steadily as buyers realize that cultured pearls, however beautiful, will never carry the same scarcity. Most people can't tell a natural pearl from a cultured one just by looking. And honestly, neither can most jewelers without instrumentation, which is exactly why so many genuine natural strands have been sold for the price of a costume necklace by owners who simply never ask the question. If your pearls have slight irregularities, subtle color variation, and a weight that feels heavier than you'd expect, don't assume they're costume. Have them x-rayed. That's the only way to know if they're natural, and it's the only test that actually matters here. Number 6. Retro-era ruby cocktail rings. The 1940s produced enormous sculptural gold jewelry, thick rose gold, bold geometric lines, built around rubies that were almost always Burmese or Ceylon in origin, because that's simply what was available before global supply chains shifted. These pieces were made during wartime metal restrictions, which means the gold itself is often lower carat and unusually alloyed. Another marker that's becoming a specialty in its own right, but the real value sits in the center stone. A retro-era piece holding a genuine unheated ruby of even modest size is now being separated from its setting, reappraised, and in some cases completely remounted because the stone alone is worth multiples of what the entire vintage piece originally sold for. These rings were built to be noticed, which is a strange kind of irony now, because that same boldness is exactly what makes people assume they're costume pieces from a less serious era of jewelry making. If you own a large, boxy gold ring from this era with a deep red center stone, don't let its slightly dated look fool you into thinking it's dated in value. Get the stone pulled and tested before anyone tells you what they think it's worth. Number 5. Art Nouveau opals. Opal jewelry from the Art Nouveau period, roughly 1890 to 1910, was designed by artists who treated the stone like a living thing, with flowing gold settings shaped like vines and wings, built specifically to showcase natural play of color. Much of the finest material used during this era came from Australian fields that have since been depleted or closed entirely, particularly early black opal deposits that produced color saturation modern mining rarely matches. These pieces are fragile. Opal is a soft stone, and a huge percentage of Art Nouveau opal jewelry has been damaged or lost over the past century, which means intact surviving examples are becoming genuinely scarce. Specialist auctions have seen fine Art Nouveau opal pieces with strong original color pull prices well beyond their estimates as buyers realize supply simply cannot be replaced. Because opal is soft and reacts badly to heat, dry air, and rough handling, a huge share of what survived the last century didn't survive well, which means a piece with strong, undamaged original color today has already outlasted almost everything made alongside it. If you own a flowing gold piece with an opal that flashes red and green across its surface, that stone was likely mined from a source that no longer exists, and the setting around it was made by hands that don't work that way anymore either. Number 4. Whitby jet mourning jewelry. Jet isn't a mineral in the traditional sense, it's fossilized wood, and the finest source the world has ever known came from a narrow stretch of coastline near Whitby, England. During the Victorian era, particularly after Queen Victoria's decades of mourning turned black jewelry into a cultural necessity, an entire industry rose around hand-carving Whitby jet into mourning brooches, beads, and cameos. That industry effectively collapsed by the early 20th century, and the highest quality seams of Whitby jet were largely exhausted along with it. Genuine hand-carved Whitby jet, not the glass or vulcanite imitations that flooded the market even at the time, is now a specialist category with its own certification standards. Fine, deeply carved, unchipped pieces with documented Whitby provenance are commanding prices that would have been unthinkable for what was once considered a mourning accessory rather than a gemstone. Because Whitby jet was once mass-produced for a public in mourning, people assume there must be plenty of it left. But the finest deep-carved seam material ran out generations ago, and what's circulating now is mostly imitation from the very period it was imitating. If you own black carved jewelry from this period, warm it slightly with your hand. Real jet feels warm quickly. Glass stays cold. That simple test alone could tell you whether you're holding fossil or fake. Number 3. Old mine cut and old European cut diamonds. Before modern cutting equipment and mathematically optimized proportions existed, diamond cutters shaped stones by eye and by candlelight, producing old mine cuts with high crowns, small tables, and slightly irregular outlines, followed later by the more symmetrical old European cut. These stones throw light completely differently than a modern, round, brilliant, softer, warmer, with a flash pattern that collectors describe as almost impossible to replicate intentionally. For decades, these diamonds were routinely recut into modern shapes to improve them, which means every surviving, untouched old mine or old European cut stone is now part of a shrinking, non-renewable population. The vintage jewelry market has shifted hard toward preserving rather than recutting these stones, and prices for genuine, uncut, original examples have climbed well past what an equivalent modern diamond of the same carat, weight, and clarity would bring. Dealers who once quietly recut these stones to modernize them for resale have largely reversed course, because buyers now specifically seek out the irregularity, the candlelight warmth, the visible fingerprint of a hand that worked 2 centuries ago, as the entire point of the purchase, rather than a flaw to correct. Modern cutters can technically imitate the outline of an old mine cut today, but they're starting from a different set of proportions and priorities entirely, which means even a deliberate modern recreation reads differently under a loupe than a stone that was actually shaped by hand 200 years ago. If you own an antique diamond ring and a jeweler has ever suggested recutting it to make it sparkle more, that advice may have cost previous owners a fortune. Don't repeat their mistake. Number 2. Belle époque platinum and diamond jewelry. When platinum became workable for fine jewelry around the turn of the 20th century, it allowed for settings so delicate they looked almost woven. Garland motifs, milligrain edges, and diamond work so fine it seems impossible without modern tools. This entire aesthetic depended on hand craftsmanship that has essentially disappeared. The artisans trained in this exact milligrain and knife-edge technique were a small, specialized group even in their own time. A genuine, unaltered Belle époque piece in its original platinum mounting, with its original old-cut diamonds still in place, represents both a design movement and a manufacturing technique that cannot be commissioned today at any price because the specific training pipeline that produced it no longer exists. You cannot walk into a workshop anywhere in the world and simply order this level of hand milligrain work reproduced from scratch, not because the materials are unavailable, but because the specific generational skill required to do it invisibly, without a single tool mark showing, effectively died with the artisans who practiced it. Fine documented Belle époque pieces from recognized ateliers of the period have been quietly climbing in specialist auctions for years, often outperforming pieces with larger stones but lesser provenance. Because platinum doesn't tarnish the way silver does, many Belle époque pieces have survived in remarkably wearable condition, which ironically makes them easy to mistake for well-made modern reproductions instead of the genuine century-old originals they actually are. If you own lace-like platinum jewelry from this era, the delicacy that makes it look fragile is exactly what makes it valuable. Don't let anyone convince you to melt it down for the metal. Number 1. Georgian rose-cut diamond jewelry. This is the oldest and rarest category on this entire list. Rose-cut diamonds, flat-bottomed, domed on top, faceted entirely by hand before the steam-powered and later electric cutting equipment of the 19th century existed, represent a level of hand craftsmanship that simply cannot be recreated using modern methods, because modern methods were specifically invented to move away from this exact technique. Surviving Georgian pieces, roughly 1714 to 1837, are almost always set in silver-topped gold with closed backs and foiling, a combination built to maximize the limited brilliance a hand-cut stone can produce under candlelight. Very little Georgian jewelry has survived intact. Pieces were routinely broken down, restyled, and their stones recut into newer fashions across 2 centuries of shifting taste, which means every original, unaltered example that remains today is one of an actively shrinking, finite population that gets smaller every single year, not because of mining, but because of history itself. Fine. Documented Georgian rose-cut pieces at major specialist auctions have consistently outpaced general antique jewelry indices, and specialists increasingly describe the category as under-recognized relative to its actual rarity. Specialists in this category often describe a strange feeling when they hold a genuine, untouched piece for the first time, the sense that they're not looking at a copy of an old style, but at the actual original object the style was built around, made once by one pair of hands and never repeated exactly the same way again. If you own a piece from this era, foiled, closed-backed, with that soft, warm, low-brilliance sparkle unlike anything cut today, understand that you are not holding an antique. You are holding one of the last physical objects left from a manufacturing method the world walked away from 200 years ago and never went back to. Every piece on this list survived something: a war, a fashion shift, a relative who almost sold it, a century of hands that didn't know what they were holding. The mines that produce these materials are closed or exhausted. The craftsmen who made these settings trained in techniques nobody teaches anymore, and in most cases, nobody alive today learned to replace them because there was never a reason to. That's what makes vintage different from simply old. Old just means time has passed. Vintage, in this specific sense, means time has passed and nothing since has been able to fill the gap it left behind, and the pieces that are left are not being replaced, they're only being lost, one estate sale at a time, one well-meaning cash-for-gold counter at a time, to people who don't know what they're looking at and never will, unless someone tells them first. If you have one of these vintage pieces sitting in a drawer, in a safe deposit box, or worn without a second thought on your own hand, you now know what it might actually be, and you owe it to yourself to find out for certain before anyone else gets the chance to tell you what it's worth. Hit the like button if one of these surprised you. Subscribe, because we go this deep on every single video. No fluff, no filler, just the stones and the pieces that actually matter. And drop a comment with the piece in your own family that you'd never sell no matter what anyone offered you for it. We read every single one of them. See you in the next video. And whatever you're about to do with that old jewelry box, don't touch it until you've watched this one twice.